Hello everyone, and welcome to the chapter where we discuss date and time functions. Now we discuss some of the formatting of dates and times in the beginners course, but we're going to be talking about some of the more complex functions you can use when working with dates and times. So first of all, let's start off with times. Excel actually registers this data. So as you can see, the time value that we're familiar with, for example, 12 a.m., Excel doesn't actually register it like that. It just stores it as a number. So 12 a.m. to Excel is equal to 0. As you can see, it's equal to that, and I've just formatted it as a number. 6 a.m. is recorded as 0.25 because 1/4 of the day has passed, and so forth. And then partial time, such as 9:15 a.m., is equal to 0.39, and so forth. Now, the interesting thing is, even if you just type 12 p.m. like that, Excel will actually just recognize that as text instead of a date. And the reason is it needs to be in a very exact format. Now, the issue here is, you can see it's got the apostrophe here, which indicates it's text. The issue here is we forgot to add in a space. Alternatively, we could have put the wrong symbol in between here and done a colon like that, and it's going to convert it to text because Excel can't read it. So the first thing is just making sure that your formats are in the correct format. Times are actually also quite tricky to work with just because of that formatting issue. It's more tricky than dates and numbers. So let's look at this example here. We've got a very common example where we want to calculate the time elapsed between a flight departure and a flight arrival. So we've got 6 a.m. and 9:11 p.m. So ordinarily people are just going to go arrival time less departure time, right? So that should get us the answer. But what Excel is saying is it's 3:11 p.m., which obviously isn't the correct answer. And again, this comes down to formatting. Most problems with working with with times, can be solved with just reformatting it. So, and checking that you've actually formatted this input data correctly, which looks like that's okay. So how we're going to fix this problem is we're going to select on our cell over here, which is formatted incorrectly. I'm going to go right click, format cell. And then within here, we're going to scroll down and find hour, minute, minute, like this. And now it's going to show you the number of hours and the number of minutes. So it's 15 hours, 11 minutes. We can change this to 6:01 a.m. and this should now show 0 hours and 1 minute. So that's working with dates at a high level. Working with times. Dates are a little bit more common. We tend to use this a lot in the workplace. It comes up a lot in Excel models and things like that. So it's more important that you understand how date functions work over time functions. So first of all, a few high-level Excel functions that we're going to go through. Number one is the today function. So it's quite similar to the now function as well. So all you do is you go equals today, and you do start bracket, end bracket. Now this is a dynamic formula, which means that this connects into your system and it updates regularly. So for example, if I were to reopen this workbook tomorrow, on tomorrow's date, it's going to show up as the 23rd instead of the 22nd. The now function takes this to a whole another level. What the now function does is it shows you, let me just expand this. It shows you today's date and today's time as well. So for example, if you're reviewing an Excel workbook in work from one of your colleagues, what you could do is have a sign-off function, type the now function, and then hard-code it by going Control-C and then paste special as values, and all of a sudden you've got an easy way of recording when you've looked at the document. So similar to time, Excel looks at dates in an unusual way as well. So let's say we want to know what the day of what day and month it is in this particular formula. Because as you can see, depending on whether you're in the US or Australia or another country, it's sometimes difficult to determine whether they're talking about month, day, year, or day, month, year, and so forth. So an easy way of figuring that out from a date is just to use the day function. So equals day, start bracket, and then you just choose the time value over here. And as you can see, let me just convert that to a number. So it's saying the day is the 2nd. Now let's drag that down and change day to month this time. And we can do the same for month. So we can figure out that it's the 2nd month, and we'll do the same for year as well. But change that to year. Let me just change that to a number so it's easier to read as well. So now when we change these around, let's say we go 03, 04, 2002, how do we know which one is the day and the month? So we know that the day is the 3rd and the month is the 4th by using this function. Now, of course, you can, because we've converted this to individual values, we can also work backwards and show the date from those individual days, months, and year values as well. Do this using the date function. So how we use the date function is we type equals date, and then Excel will tell us that we need a year, comma, month, comma, day. So first of all, we're going to select the year value that we've extracted. Then we're going to go comma and then use the month value that we've extracted, and then the day value. And we press enter, and all of a sudden it's going to show us the date function that we've got here. Alright, so we can also manipulate dates in certain ways. So let's look at a few different examples. So number one is just adding and subtracting dates from our start date of here, which is the 10th of May. Now, if we want to add 5 days, the formula is very simple. It's just like adding two things together, because by default, Excel assumes that you're talking about the number of days. So all we're going to do is we're going to go equals our start date plus our number of days. And there, we're going to have our new date, which is 5 days later, which is the 15th, so that makes sense. And it's the same for 5 days earlier. So what we want to do is we take our start date and we want to minus the number of days. So fairly easy to do. What if we want to increase our months or subtract our months in the same way? We can't just go equals that plus that, because as we discussed earlier, when we're dealing with dates, it's comprised of 3 different values: the number of days, the number of months, and the number of years. So you actually have to specify to Excel which one you want to increase. If you don't specify, Excel just assumes you want to increase your days. So the function we're going to use to increase the number of months is eDate. Okay, so this is a very common formula that we're going to use. So let's say I want this date here, the exact same date, but I want it exactly 5 months later. So what we can do is we can go eDate, bracket, start date. I'm going to select that cell there, comma, and number of months you want to increase it by. So we'll select this number over here because we want to increase it by 5 months, end bracket. You'll notice it's populated some weird time value number. Again, this comes down to formatting. So let's just change this to a date. We can do a short date. And as you can see, it's the number of months that's changed. Okay, and we can do the same thing. Well, I should say month. I should say months. We can do the same thing if we want to subtract 5 months as well. So let's just copy this formula down and correct it. So our start date is this one here, it's the 10th. And the number of months is, this time we want to go negative because we're subtracting it. So we're going to go 19, comma, negative E21. And all of a sudden, this date here has been subtracted by 5 months. Now, quite often when we're working with Excel, especially models where we want to show different months in perpetuity, so we might have today's date over here as a starting point, but then I want to know for the first month after that, I want to have the end of May here, like that, and then I want to have the end of June over here. So I want June, July, and so forth into perpetuity so I can create my model. But what I don't want to do is just equal plus 30, because some months have 30 days, some months have 31, some have 28. So we need to use a specific formula to get our months in that structure, and that the formula we're going to use is called end of month. So what we can do is we can go end of month like that. Our start date, so let's select our date over here. So we've got today, and then comma, and then number of months. So we can do 0. So that's going to take us to the end of May, because it's the same month as here. Or we can do And then over here, what we can do is we can go end of month, select the previous month, and then go comma 1. And then no matter how many days there are in the month, Excel is going to know what date you have to select it as. So we can see it's going from 30th to the 31st, to the 31st, to the 30th. So Excel already knows how many days in the month. You don't need to adjust for that at all. So a really useful function. You can do it on a negative basis as well. So you can go equals end of month, start date, and then negative number of months. And it'll take you that number of months backwards. Okay, so what about years? Now, there are other functions that you can use, which would probably calculate this for you, but what I'm going to get you to do is just to use the exact same formulas that I've taught you for months, so you don't have to learn too many things, so you can just stick with the same formula. Now, all you have to do when you calculate your number of months is just times it by 12, because 12 months are equal to a year. So let's say we want to add 5 years to this date above. If we want to have it on the finish on the exact same day, so on the 10th, but in 2025, what we can do is equals eDate, start date, and then how many years we want. We want 5 years, but we're going to times it by 12 because that'll because currently the formula wants us to tell it the number in months. So just end that there, and then format this as a date. And there we go, 5 years later. And you can do the same for negatives as well. So eDate, start date, then 5 times negative 12. And there we go, 5 years earlier. Okay, so the next thing we're going to be talking about is how to calculate the working days between two particular dates. So the formula for that is net working days. We'd often use this in a workplace scenario where we want to calculate certain things which only occur on weekdays and want to ignore weekends. So, certain sale periods, operating periods of businesses which aren't open on the weekends and so forth. So the most basic formula for that is equals net work days. So we do comma, start date, comma, end date. And that is going to calculate the number of working days between those two periods. Now, the other consideration is what about holidays? Because we need to know, in certain jurisdictions there's going to be, certain holidays which aren't in other jurisdictions, and how does that interact with this? And also, how does it interact where it's a weekday as well? A weekend, because we only want to count weekdays, so we don't really care if a holiday's fallen on a Saturday. So Excel has an ability to factor that in through this section here, which is holidays. But the only downside is, you need to manually list out what the holidays are in your jurisdiction, because Excel doesn't know all of the holidays, and even if it did, they change over time, or you might have a different interpretation of what a holiday is. So what you can do is just create your own manual list over here, and let's say, and then we're going to keep this formula as is, but we're going to add a comma at the end, and we're going to select our holiday range like this, and like that. And now Excel will tell us how many non-Saturday or non-weekend holidays that you've put in that range fall in between those two dates and subtract it from the total. So as we can see, I just undid that, and previously it was 169, and now it's 168 because one of those has fallen onto a holiday, onto a Saturday or a Sunday. So that's everything. Oh, and then quickly we'll touch on date diff. So this is an interesting way of figuring out the time period between two separate dates, and you can format it as either years, months, or days difference between the two. So let's use the example of, we want to know how old we are. We were born in the 1st of January 1960, and the second date we want to use is today, which we discussed. So we want to calculate the number of years lived. So the formula we're going to do is date diff. And then we're going to go the start date, the end date, and then we have to manually tell Excel how we want it formatted. So we can go years, like so. We can also go, let me just lock this. We can go years like that. Now, it's not going to give you the rounded amount. So if it's 60.5, it's not going to tell you that. It's just going to say 60. We can also do it for months. So if I drag that down and change this to an M, you can see that in total it's 724 months. So we could figure out the leftovers by dividing by 12, so it's actually 60.33. And also we can do the same for days as well. So if I copy that down and just change this to a D, and all of a sudden it's 22,000, and we can divide that by 365 and get a fairly similar answer, but it's slowly getting more accurate because there's no rounding involved. You can also combine them, so you can go, if the first one's year, what you can do here is YM, and it'll only show you the leftover. So it's 64. And then you could also do MD. MD. So basically it just tells you the leftover. So 60 years, 4 months, 21 days is basically the exact age of someone. So that's everything for time and date values. Hope you've learned something before we move on to our next chapter, which is conditional formatting.